1 year ago today, I began being the victim of sexual harassment and retaliation in the workplace. And I feel like it's time to finally share with you everything that's happened, because I hope that somehow it helps me get it off my chest. And more importantly, if you're a victim too, I hope you know that you're not alone out there. Welcome everyone to Powered by Rainbows. I'm of course your host, Professor Pride, or as some of you might know me in real life, Matt Haslam. Now, unknowingly to many of our audience members out there, 2022 was a really difficult year for our company, trying to produce 200 episodes of our show, but we didn't have the funding to do so. Simply put, YouTube changed their entire platform to compete against TikTok and ruined things for many long-form creators like us. And so the ad revenue just wasn't there to produce 200 episodes in 2023. So we knew we needed to change some things up. And that meant on the side of working for PBR, making new episodes hopefully every week or two at the latest, I was gonna have to take a second job, working for another company. That way, hopefully, I can provide for my family. So that's exactly what I tried to do. I applied for a couple different positions, like the executive director of a local LGBTQ charity. I applied to be the event director of another LGBTQ organization, and I applied to be the graphic designer and a couple other things for local LGBTQ organizations. I actually did get an interview for one of those jobs for being the executive director of an LGBTQ charity. Unfortunately, the other 4 individuals and myself, who all took hours out of our day to interview for that position, realized afterwards that they were just going for a government grant, and they were wasting all 5 of our time. So none of us ever got the job, but it was just so sad to see, because here I was really hoping that I could help the LGBTQ community even more with a different position. But alas, none of those other places ever called me back, and I just basically stopped trying to work for LGBTQ charities and organizations. Because truthfully, if they didn't want someone named Professor Pride being their diversity, equity, and inclusion representative, then I don't know what they were looking for. But at the time, my fiance, who I'm very lucky to say is now my husband, was working for an insurance company. He was working as a workers' compensation claims adjuster. And basically what that means is if you're working for a company, legally in the United States, they're required to have workers' compensation insurance for you. Just in case you get hurt at work and something happens, the insurance can cover the medical cost and your time off so that you can get better. And so that was his job, investigating these claims and helping people that needed help, that were hurt at work. And he was doing really good at that job, by the way. So he said, hey, on my floor, all my managers are super nice, all my team members are really good friends of mine. How about you work for the same insurance company? And that way we can drive to work together, we can drive home together, and we can have lunch every day in the lunchroom together for a half an hour. And not to mention, he already knew all the proprietary software that they used and could help me navigate it a little bit, however he can, right? And so I said, yeah, sure, let me work for the same company since it's so highly recommended by you, and you had such a great experience so far. So I applied for a job, and I actually put my fiance down as a reference for that position because he already worked there, and he would receive a $500 bonus for bringing me onto the company. So it worked out well for both of us. And on January 18th, 2023, I had an interview with who would eventually become my supervisors. And in that interview, weirdly, and I probably should have seen this as a red flag looking back now, they asked me to promise them that I would stay with the company until retirement. Because as they said, they had a lot of turnover in this specific position and weren't able to keep people very long So they wanted me to promise to be with the company for a long, long time. And I agreed because of course you agree to that sort of question in an interview, although it is very weird for them to ask. So shortly after, on February 6th, 2023, I began working for this insurance company. And I was quite happy in the first week where they were training us on how to use the software, but my fiance already taught me how to use all of this software. So I was golden during this week-long training. And the HR representatives that were training us were thrilled that I actually knew so much because it was one less person they needed to worry about. So in that week, everything went great. And on Friday of that week, we were all mandated to complete a sexual harassment prevention training. And we were all mandated to get certified in that before moving on to our positions elsewhere in the company in different departments and on different floors, because this first initial week was just training for all the new hires. It didn't matter which position in the company you were going to work next week and beyond. So the following Monday, I started getting trained in my actual position on the job that I was going to be doing. And I was trained by a coworker of mine who we will call Woman A, right? And she starts training me. Nothing really seems off at first, but I start asking her questions of, hey, so hold on a second, what do we do about this file over here, you know? And trying to ask genuine questions about the job itself so I would understand once I was let go on my own to do this, right? She didn't like questions very much. In fact, she started to yell at me every time I asked a question. She started to stand over top of me and try to intimidate me during my training in my cubicle so that I couldn't physically leave the cubicle. And that was pretty weird in a professional office for a coworker to try to intimidate you physically and yell at you constantly. In fact, other coworkers in my department reported her for doing this to our manager, but no one ever spoke to her. Nothing ever happened. No one from my management ever contacted me and asked if I was okay. So all of that was weird, but I felt a sense of happiness because other coworkers were seeing it and they were the ones reporting it to our manager. But anyway, time goes on and I eventually get trained on how to do my position. Not long after I was hired, on February 27th, 2023, it was just like every other day in the office. Nothing really special happened so far, right? But Woman A, the same woman who tried to intimidate me and yell at me in training, was now sitting at the cubicle right next to me. And in front of her was someone we'll call Man A. Man A goes to the men's room, does his business, comes back. And he's not feeling that well in his stomach. So Woman A, behind me, says to him, quote, "I would like to swallow your medicine, Man A," as he was coming back from the restroom. This is so weird in so many ways, not to mention the fact that she was easily 30 years older than he was. So it was creepy on so many levels. And that right there is considered sexual harassment. It was the first time I had experienced it at this company. And truthfully, I didn't do anything about it because maybe those two had a relationship between each other that was way more intimate than what I was aware of, but it also was creepy because, yes, she was easily 30 years older than he was, but other people were around. And sexual harassment doesn't mean that the person you're telling this to is uncomfortable necessarily. Sexual harassment can also be a third party being uncomfortable that it was said in their vicinity. So it was creepy and I didn't like it, but at the same time, I let it go because I didn't want to cause any trouble. I didn't want to be the tattletale only a few weeks into my company employment there. And for context moving forward here in our story, you're going to have to understand a little about my job and my position. So it was my job to write contracts between our small insurance provider and the insurance producers out there selling our policies, right? So just for some clarification here, you can think of this as the small little business that's downtown wherever you live, right? You walk into this small insurance company and say, hey, I want to be insured. I want my house insured. I want my car insured. I want, my business to have some insurance, right? And these are the small little companies that would say, all right, let's figure out what's right for you and give you some options of all of these different companies that you can choose from to have an insurance policy with, right? So they would contact us and say, hey, I want to sell your insurance policies to my customers. And we would write a contract between them and us to say exactly what that agreement meant. It was my job to write the physical contract with terms and conditions on exactly how that relationship would work professionally between our company and theirs. Now, before I started working at insurance, it would take sometimes over 1 year from the time they applied to be one of our agencies to the time we replied with a contract to say, here's the contract to sign. Think about that for just a second. You want to sell a product, right? And you don't hear back from the manufacturer until a year later sometimes. That is so mind-bogglingly stupid, because think of how much product you can sell in a year's time. And they were just giving it up because this woman A, who trained me and was the only person at the company besides me to do this job, didn't want to reply to them. Think of how stupid that is, right? So I was brought in on this position to help that customer response time, to bring that down, and hopefully we can get back to people within 1 fiscal year. Now, during this training, my trainer, woman A, kept teaching me how to do things incorrectly. And it was seemingly on purpose. She kept implying that she got the last person who held my position fired or pushed her to quit. And that was insane to me. Why would you brag about pushing someone to quit or get fired who was helping you with your workload, right? But then I realized the workload wasn't that much. It was enough for one person to do, and she's been with the company for over 16 years, somehow convincing her managers that she was so far behind because it was so much work to do. Well, then how come by the time I left the company 7 months later, we were now getting back to customers within 1 business day instead of over 1 year? How come? Well, it's because the job wasn't that hard to begin with, but she was doing it so poorly and so slowly that she somehow convinced the managers it was a difficult position that she needed a second person's help with. And it was because of this situation that I was told to immediately stop writing contracts. And instead I was told to go validate licenses. Basically, if you're an insurance agent out there selling insurance for us, you need to provide us with your insurance license number from the state to tell us, hey, I'm licensed to sell insurance. And once a year, it was my department's job to look at every single license for every insurance agent that sold our insurance to say, yes, this license is valid, still up to date, and is confirmed with the state insurance board, right? Once a year, we had to do that. And it meant you had to take their license number, check it against a federal database, and make sure that it was still effective, right? And make sure that they kept it up to date. Now, there were some licenses there that made absolutely no sense. For instance, one person would have been over 150 years old if they were still selling insurance, and we still had them in the system as one of our licensed agents currently selling. And so I brought this up to my manager and other situations that were big red flags, and nothing was ever done about it. In fact, my manager said, well, it doesn't really matter anyway. I asked, what do you mean? Well, turns out she had me do all of these license checks for all 400 and some thousand insurance agents that sold our policies, but it didn't matter to us if their license was valid or not. We kept them in our system anyway. I also want to note that in this position, it was so boring doing this process that I actually got permission from my managers to wear a pair of headphones and listen to some podcast or music throughout the day, because truly, you didn't need to concentrate too heavily to do this task, especially considering that the outcome really didn't matter anyway. So while I was doing these checks, I just listened to some podcast and a pair of headphones. But on March 10th, 2023, two of my coworkers started committing way more sexual harassment in the workplace. Remember man A from earlier that was sexually harassed by woman A from our story? Well, now man A and his best friend, man B, started to debate openly in the workplace how big Mike Tyson's basketballs are. Clearly talking about his genitals, not actual basketballs. They were debating this for hours in the workplace, making everyone a little uncomfortable. But even this, I let go because I was listening to my podcast mostly, and I only really heard them in the background. Because here's the thing, you can only listen to music so loud in your ears before it starts to give you a headache after 8 hours of listening to it. So I had it on a low volume, and I overheard them in the background say this. And truly, it wasn't my conversation, so again, I let it go because I didn't want to be a tattletale or the troublemaker in the office. Later in the day, I had to use the men's room, so I went to the restroom on our floor. And here is where the most egregious act of sexual harassment was committed. I went into the stall to do my business. I closed the door and I locked it. About a minute after I walked in, another man walked into the men's room behind me and went to the urinal next to me, next to the stall I was in. Almost immediately, he whispered over to me, "Just hang out for a minute, Matt." And that's a direct quote. I was very weirded out by this in a restroom. But I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, because maybe he just wanted to talk to me in private about something that he didn't want coworkers to overhear. That is when I looked over to the stall wall on my side, and he was taking his foot underneath that wall and tapping his foot 2 times. If you're not familiar with gay cruising, that is a universal sign that you want to commit sexual relations with a person in the stall next to you, most times anonymously. This petrified me, and I immediately cleaned up as fast as I could and got the hell out of there. I raced up 2 flights of stairs to my fiancé. I told him everything that happened just a moment ago, and he was appalled. We went together to the bathroom on his floor, and from that point forward, I was now using the restroom on his floor, not my own, because I no longer felt safe using the one on my floor. So every time I would need to take a number 1 or 2, didn't matter, I had to go 2 flights up the stairs to his floor, get my fiancé, and go to the restroom together most times. Sometimes I would go by myself on his floor, but it still took me extra time just to use the restroom. Now I no longer felt safe going to the restroom in my own workplace, and I no longer felt safe in that building at all. But still, I continued to work there because I needed a job. Now, it's important to note I know exactly who did that in the bathroom to me, and for the purposes of our story here, we will name him Man C. Okay? I know exactly who did it, and I avoided him like the plague ever since then, right? But I know he has a wife and 2 kids at home, and so I didn't really care that, he had an unhappy marriage apparently at home, I thought I was very clear from day one that I had a very exclusive relationship with my fiancé, and I was very happy with that relationship being exclusive. A couple days later, on March 13th, 2023, man A and B, who again are best friends outside of work, started watching wrestling match videos on the internet on their work computers, which should never be allowed. We were told YouTube, Facebook, and all these different platforms were banned from our computers entirely. So how are they watching YouTube videos on their work computers? That was my big question. But they started watching wrestling matches, and at one point watched a music video in which the character, the main character in that music video, ends his own life with supposedly a gunshot, right? And they began speaking about how amazing suicide is and how there wasn't enough, quote, real blood in the video. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, they were discussing this. Now, I've dealt with depression my entire life, and I know how hard it is to overcome depression. But when you're forced to listen to two people discuss how there's not enough real blood and how amazing ending your own life is for 40 minutes, it chills me to the bone because it made me think of all these things I haven't thought of in years. So I actually went to my fiance, and we took a walk on our lunch break, and he tried his best to calm me down. I was physically shaking around him, and I knew things were really bad. And I knew that my depression was kind of at an all-time low in that moment. But that's to be expected because I just heard two coworkers talk about this for 40 minutes in such a bright and cheery way. What was most concerning to me was my manager was sitting right there in the room the entire time. She chose not to stop them from talking about this. And she just let them watch YouTube videos on their computers. I came back from my lunch break with my husband, and I sat down again. I started working, put my podcast on my earphones, and tried to get through the day. But then, the same people, man A and B, started watching videos of people eating disgusting foods. In other countries, they might be delicacies, I don't know. But they started watching YouTube videos of people eating turtles and squid and all these other exotic foods for United States. But in these videos, they eventually came across a video where a 12-year-old girl was eating a turtle. And that was a little disgusting, right, for us all to hear about, because during that, they were describing every single one of these videos to the entire group of people around them in excruciating detail of how the turtle was being eaten. But in this conversation, man A said to man B how he would like to, quote, babysit this girl. And man B, just like the rest of us, thought he meant this in a sexual way. So he immediately replied, "Dude, she looks like she's 12. Why do you want to have sex with her?" And man A replies, "So what if she's 12? And look, I've been working in LGBTQ education for many years now. I've been labeled by far-right conservatives and neo-Nazis as a groomer and a pedophile and many other things because I want to provide LGBTQ education to people, right? And it's chilling every time one of those words gets said about me. Truly, what you don't know is behind the scenes, every single one of my staff members and I take courses, we get certifications, and we are cleared by the Pennsylvania State Police to work around people. And that way, if someone under the age of 18 walks up to us at our booth at an event, there is no way that someone can misunderstand something that is said, and we all have the knowledge, education, and the training on how to interact with someone under the age of 18 so nothing can be misunderstood. With this situation, it was chilling me to the bone. And the worst part was, this was said openly in a professional office. My manager was sitting right next to them the entire time and could have immediately jumped up and said, "Hold on a second, you're not allowed to say that." Everyone else around me, all my other coworkers, seemingly had no reaction to this at all. I was the only one who was noticeably upset at what was just said in this office. In fact, right after this, man A and B started looking up pictures of supermodel women on their work computers and started comparing how hot each of them was and how large their breasts were. I thought, okay, so this is way too far at this point. My manager came back in the room after getting a cup to drink, and I thought, okay, here is where she's going to have a problem. She's going to step in and say, enough is enough, stop talking about this, maybe get some actual work done, right? But no, instead, she stops them and says, hey, you know what? You should look up this other supermodel who has even larger breasts. She was now encouraging them to look up women on their work computers. At this point, I simply had enough. We could no longer go on in this hostile work environment. Things needed to change. I brought things up to my manager on numerous occasions, but it was obvious at this point. My manager was not only complacent in it, but she was encouraging them to continue. So I went down to the Human Resources Department directly and started telling them what happened. Now, concerningly here, according to company policy, anytime a claim of sexual harassment is given to one of the managers, they are required by company rule to report that claim to the human resources, just in case anything ever came of it, right? But I started asking them, hey, well, you already know about all these other things that happened so far of this man entering the restroom after me and so on, but they had no report of it ever happening, meaning my manager did not ever report it according to company rule to them. I needed to start from the very beginning. But quickly, the woman I was talking to in HR stopped me and dismissed all my claims. She started saying, well, Matt, you've ran your own company for 22 years so far. You're used to working on your own. You're not used to working around other people. I quickly said, hey, hold on a second. I ran my own business for 22 years, but I've worked in professional offices before, and I've worked with very large clients before and had to run professional meetings. I know what it's like to work around other people. And if you're not giving good customer service to every one of your clients, you're gonna lose those big clients over that relationship. So it was obvious I was used to working in professional environments and cultivating lasting professional relationships, but she was dismissive and kept saying how I was the one at fault here. I was the one to blame because I wasn't used to working in an office environment. Her solution to this was, how about you just put a pair of headphones in and listen to your podcast, listen to some music. I'm sorry, wait, you're telling me the solution for them committing sexual harassment is me putting my headphones in and ignoring it? I knew she was so dismissive of my claims, and she a couple times referred to me that I might have been lying about the whole situation. So I took it upon myself to write an email the very next day to my department head, the VP of sales for the company, and the VP of HR for the company. I wrote both of them directly and told them everything that happened, because in the meeting the previous day, I was dismissed so much that I wasn't even able to tell everything that happened. I was sort of rushed out of there and told, just wear a pair of headphones from now on and ignore it. So in this email, I told them everything so far, and they told me that this formal investigation will happen and I should hear back from them soon. Now, in this email, I asked them if I could move my cubicle to the different side of the building that was in a different department That way I can still continue doing my work, but I was no longer distracted by all of these perpetrators, and I was away from the whole situation. She luckily granted that request, and I moved immediately to a different desk. From this point forward, my manager and my supervisor above her only ever reply to me in writing. I no longer can call them up. I can no longer do a video call with them. I can no longer go over to their desk and ask any question I needed to about my job. I was now mandated to write them an email question and ask them in writing where they can reply in writing. They no longer trusted me at all. But then a couple weeks later, they said that my emails were way too long describing these questions, even though if I went in person to ask these questions, it would be a hell of a lot more simple to explain the issue or the question I had. Now, like I said, my training on my actual position of writing contracts stopped about a month prior because this woman that was training me was teaching me the wrong way to do things, and she was also yelling and intimidating me in my cubicle. So they spent about a month figuring things out, and my manager eventually was the one to train me on how to do everything. So I at least had a little better training this time around. But they basically told me, hey, we're going to start all over again from the beginning, and this time you're going to be trained from our management directly instead of a coworker. Around a month later, on May 10th, 2023, I was called into a meeting with the head of HR and my supervisor. I was thinking, okay, maybe they came back with some results of this big investigation and they wanted to tell me in person. Maybe, my fiance brought up this situation of me being followed into the restroom, and, maybe his managers brought it to HR directly because they were concerned. Maybe my supervisors started noticing that, I was no longer using the men's room on that floor. I was going 2 flights up to use the restroom, and maybe they had some questions as to why. But instead, I got down to HR, and they started telling me about this claim that was made about me from man C. Remember the man that followed me into the restroom? Well, he was now claiming that I was calling man A a pedophile. I want to clarify here, I never, ever called anyone a pedophile in that building. Never said that word at all. Other than maybe the occasional priest that was charged and convicted of it. But that was outside of work, okay? I don't know where this man was getting this claim from, but I quickly realized that he was trying to get me in trouble because now he was denied anything sexual in the bathroom a couple months prior, and he was a little upset that I was no longer going to the men's room on that floor, and he could no longer follow me because my fiancé was right there outside of the stall, making sure I was safe. I quickly realized this was all retaliation to get me in trouble from this man who was not happy with his wife apparently, and was denied anything sexual from me. So I told HR all about it and said, hey, this is clear retaliation at this point. But they continued to accuse me of calling this other person by a horrible name. I continued to deny it because it wasn't true, but they were so convinced that I did. In this same meeting, the head of their HR department admitted everything to me. Now, while investigations are typically kept private to the HR department, she did assure me that all of the investigations so far were conducted and concluded. She did inform me that not only did the IT department look into all of my claims and find that these individuals did in fact look at all these YouTube videos and pictures of supermodels on their work computers, but they also interviewed all of the people in question, and all of them admitted verbatim the exact things they said. Imagine saying such atrocious things about committing sexual harassment and sexual assault on a 12-year-old child and then walking into the HR department and telling the head of HR directly that you said those things exactly as someone claimed you said them. He didn't even try to lie about it. They all admitted to everything verbatim as I claimed to HR they said. That is unbelievable to me. Not to mention the fact that I was told the only punishment any of them got was having to take a refresher course on sexual harassment prevention. A simple, like maybe half-an-hour course, that was the only punishment. And they were continuing to commit sexual harassment up to that day. So, in other words, they didn't learn anything, and HR didn't really care, because none of them were fired, even though, according to company policy, if you are retrained in sexual harassment prevention and you continue to do it, it's an automatic firing from the company, no matter what, except for these people for some reason. Now, by the time June came around, I was sitting on the opposite side of the building compared to all these other people that committed sexual harassment, and I was thinking, finally things are gonna be okay. Finally, I'm happy again working in this office because the people over there were much, much nicer, right? At least I thought so. So I continue working, but on June 1st, the supervisor of the whole department goes on vacation, and it's her prerogative to go on vacation, nothing wrong with that. But her and my manager were the only people I asked any questions to. Again, I was mandated to ask every question in writing from now on, but they were the only people I can ask any question to. And so when my supervisor went on vacation, my manager marked herself as offline the entire week so that I couldn't ask her any questions. She kept ignoring every message, every question, and so it appeared in the system like I was falling behind. I wasn't able to get contracts to agencies because she wasn't answering any question. She was ignoring all of my messages. And now I felt like I was being treated differently just because of everything that occurred. There was no doubt in my mind, and they were now purposefully ignoring me. On June 17th, my manager came back to work and gave me a 60-day progress report of how well I was doing writing contracts for agencies. And as soon as I saw this email come in, I was thrilled because I knew my numbers. I knew at this point that I had improved our customer response time from over a year to, at that point, being just about 1 week of getting back to people. And that was a massive improvement in my eyes. I had written contracts at that point for around 100 agencies or so and brought in just about $15 million of premiums from those contracts. And that was a major accomplishment in my eyes. I thought I was doing really well. But in this 60-day progress report, my supervisor accused me of lying about my weekly emails. She accused me of lying about everything under the sun. And nowhere in this report did she mention any single thing I've done good for the company. I was floored. I did so well signing agencies up that I brought us our customer response time for the entire department to now being just about a week. And she didn't have anything good to say. I helped us bring in $15 million in business, and you can't find one compliment to say about me? On June 21st, I brought this up to the head of HR, and I said, my supervisor is now blatantly lying about me, saying I lie to the VP of sales for the company, even though it's not true. She was slandering my name and my reputation at the company. And so I requested an immediate transfer to a different department. You see, when I initially got hired, I was told I can either be a producer relations representative, which wrote contracts for agencies, or I can be a customer service representative, answering phone calls with people that needed different questions answered, like What is your fax number? I would like to talk to my claims adjuster, and so on. I had the option of either career path, and I chose the one writing contracts because truthfully, I love writing contracts. I love getting deep into terms and conditions and legal talk. I love that. So I went that path. In retrospect now, that was a terrible choice and I should have gone with customer service rep. But at the time I didn't know that, how bad it would be in the certain department. So I told HR, hey, you offered me both jobs before. I want to be transferred immediately to the other one, customer service, because I've had enough with this now. Now my supervisor is slandering my name. But again, another investigation was opened, and in the end, I was told, hey, you can't transfer to a different department. Your manager, although she was saying all these things, we think you were lying too. Hold on a second. You heard from all these different people admitting to every word they said. You heard from your IT department that they literally did look all these things up on their work computers, and you still think I was lying about the whole thing? That is insane to me, right? Like, how much evidence do you need to prove someone is telling the truth? Later, when I was talking to my husband, I realized they had no confidence at all in me from the day they hired me, where basically I said I ran my own company for 20 years, and now I was looking for a job in an entry-level position in this company. But they didn't believe me because a lot of people that sell drugs and go to jail say that they are self-employed just to put something on a resume to cover over those days or years they're in jail. And apparently this is so commonplace they didn't believe that my company was real. So my husband, who at the time was just my fiance, had to literally tell the head of HR that I would probably be willing to share my literal tax returns to prove that my company was real in order for them to believe me. This company did not believe a word I fucking said, ever. And that is deeply concerning, because at what point does so much evidence stack up that you have to say to yourself, maybe this one guy has been telling the truth all along? I also brought some other concerns up to her, including the fact that on the other side of the building, coworkers were just as bad. The truth was, this supervisor had no control over her entire department, and everyone was committing sexual harassment, besides, I think, 3 people at this point. You see, they were across the room from each other in a professional office full of cubicles and screaming back and forth to each other about how bad their periods were, about how their cat's anus had anal fissures on it because they were sick, about how many boyfriends they currently have that don't know about each other existing, and about how much ejaculate each of their boyfriends put inside of them last night. Imagine in a professional office hearing people scream that across the room. Now imagine you're the coworker in the middle of that conversation, on the phone at the same exact time, talking to a client that gives your company over $50 million a year in business. Imagine being on the other end, hearing that in the background. Now, I'm not that company, but I assure you, if I was that representative from that company and hearing all that in the background, I would end all business with that company immediately. So I brought this up to HR and I said, hey, it's still happening. I think it's your supervisor that's the real issue here, because so many people think this is okay behavior in the office. Again, they investigated and found every single word I claimed to be true. They asked all these different people if they said what I claimed that they said, and yep, sure enough, they admitted to every single word. Oh yeah, sure, I said about, how much my vagina was bleeding. I was telling my coworkers all about how many anal fissures my cat has. every single word they admitted to. But while this investigation is going on, my husband and I are on vacation. We took a honeymoon because my birthday was July 3rd, we got married on July 9th, and truthfully, it was just a situation where I needed for us to get away for a little bit, to go out and forget about all of this happening for just a little while. So we went on vacation, and while that vacation was happening, they were conducting this huge investigation back in the company. And turns out everyone admitted to everything. So again, I was telling the truth. But by the time I came back to the office on July 6th from this vacation, every person in the office was now staring evil daggers at me because I got them in trouble. They had to take an extra sexual harassment prevention training course as a refresher. How dare I bring up these concerns? They all hated me. And it was obvious now. And so with all of this retaliation against me, I knew it was time to leave this department. So I submitted a request to HR to move to anywhere else in the company. I did not care where at this point. I just wanted out. And I knew what was happening was not going to stop. It was going to keep continuing because there was no actions ever taken. I mean, think about this for a second. If they just fired one person out of this entire situation, the rest of them would be so scared of getting fired themselves that they would stop doing it immediately. And they'd be in their entire legal right to fire one person because it was in their company policy that if they retrain you and it continues to happen, you would be fired no matter what. But for these people, they were above that rule somehow. So I requested to move to a different department, and the head of HR calls me into a meeting and tells me that no, I would never be allowed to be in customer service. Why? I asked. Because it's answering phones and helping customers, which is what I was currently doing, by the way. You know, I was answering questions in emails and phone calls from current clients that gave us millions of dollars a year. What was the difference being a customer service representative? In fact, that was a position I was offered initially as well. So what happened? Well, as she said, she no longer trusted me in a position where I would be dealing with clients. Hold on a second. I've literally signed 193 agencies at this point to work with this insurance company. 193 agencies have submitted legal documents to me that I handled, and they all submitted direct deposit forms with their bank account and routing and account numbers directly on these forms. And I had 193 direct deposit forms on my computer at any given time at this point. What in the world was she thinking when she said she didn't trust me? Because it was pretty obvious that they can trust me with massive amounts of confidential information, and it was obvious that I wasn't doing anything inappropriate. I was keeping these clients safe at all times, and I was keeping our company safe at all times. In fact, one of my coworkers in that same department, totally unrelated to any of our stories so far, he's completely a separate person, but his grandmother received an email that was a little suspicious, and so he was bragging to the whole office about how he thought it was a suspicious email, so he forwarded it to his insurance company email that he had professionally because they had better cybersecurity software than he did on his personal computer. And suddenly, a couple days later, our entire system was shut down and no one was allowed to even enter the system because there was a security breach. We later got an entire course from the IT department on how to prevent this sort of thing from happening in the future. It was so stupid of a security breach that you really didn't need a class for it, but apparently you did, right? And suddenly I was the one that they didn't trust with confidential information, but all these other people were trusted with it? That's completely unbelievable. And it was just a lame excuse she was using not to allow me to move to a different department. The one thing interesting, though, was This was my only option to get out of this department. And she said I would have to interview for it. Wait a second. Someone is dealing with constant harassment in the workplace, a hostile work environment every single day, where they're physically sick in their stomach going to work every single day. They do not feel safe enough using the restroom on their own floor that they have to go 2 flights up the stairs to use a different one where their husband can protect them the entire time. And every single day when they go home, they have dealt with so much harassment that they cry their eyes out. That is what I was dealing with. And the only way I can get out of it was interviewing for a different position. Not, hey, we need to get this person out immediately. He's moving to your department. It's done already. No questions. That was unbelievable to me. But they also informed me that if I chose to move, it would be a $3 an hour pay cut. So I was now suffering a financial loss just by trying to get out of the situation and stop the harassment from happening. And that, my dear friends, is what is called in the legal world retaliation. And it's a big word, but it's a word that was specifically used by my attorney. And here is where we get to the fun part of the story. Because right after that meeting where I was offered a $3 an hour pay cut to get out, and I would have to interview for it, I immediately contacted an employment attorney. I provided all the evidence I had. And oh yes, I kept evidence. I had every email that was ever sent to me from these managers admitting to most of this. I had written diary entries of times, dates, who exactly was involved, direct quotes that were written on my computer as they were saying them in real time. Yes, I kept notes the entire time. In fact, this attorney said to me that it was the most amount of evidence he had ever seen for a case like this. But after hiring this attorney, he eventually got to the part where he realized the only financial loss would be a $3 an hour pay cut. And for someone that only worked for the company for 7 months, that lawsuit would only be worth $3 an hour times 1 year of pay. So it wouldn't amount to more than a couple $1,000s in a lawsuit. Here I was thinking this was going to be a big payout. The truth was it was only a couple thousand. And after you get done with all the filing fees and attorney fees, simply put, we would be paying out more money to this attorney to actually do this lawsuit than we would be receiving in the end. So if I didn't want to bankroll this entire thing on my current salary, then it was pretty much a case that we could never file. And so his advice was to just get out of the situation and quit. Now, while all of this is going on, my husband has been passed over for multiple promotions in his role as a workers' compensation claims adjuster. His managers kept telling them that he's on a short list to get promotions. He's doing so well, right? And many times in these promotions, he was on a short list of maybe 5 or 6 people to get promotions. Then his managers on his floor that really loved him took their short list down to HR and said, hey, we want to do one final check with you guys so that we can give promotions to all these people, right? But then suddenly, for an unknown reason, my husband didn't get the promotion 3 times in a row. Then his managers told him, you're so close, just one more time, just wait a little bit longer. So he did. Again, it happened. Wait a little bit longer. And again, he was told, just next time a promotion comes up, you'll surely get it then. He was told this 3 times. Now, at this point in the story, I want to clarify for legal reasons that I do not know what was said in those meetings. I was not there. My husband wasn't there. No one we could talk to was in those meetings between his managers and the managers of HR to know exactly what was said. All that we know is that time and again, he was told he's so close to getting a promotion And then at the very last minute, when it was taken to HR, suddenly he didn't get any promotions. Any reasonable person out there might jump to some conclusions here and have your own opinions. You might have the opinion at this point that he was denied promotions at this company because he was actually the one that recommended me for the job in the first place. And because I was stirring all this trouble up and bringing up claims of sexual harassment that really did happen, he was now getting retaliated against as well. You might have that opinion. I'm not going to say anything is true or untrue there, okay? Because I don't know for certain exactly what happened in those meetings. All I'm going to say is that he didn't get any promotions. But at this point, after getting denied for a promotion 3 times, my husband decided to start applying at different companies. And eventually this company out there offered him a job of being a claims adjuster for them for double his current salary. But after receiving that job offer, he put his 2 weeks notice in. And this was conveniently the same week that we heard back from our attorney that this case truly was not worth going after and that we would never recover our money from it. So at this point, the only revenge I can get was to not tell them that his final day after his 2 weeks would be my final day. That was the only thing left I had on the table to get any sort of revenge on this company that treated me so poorly. They kept saying that I wasn't used to a professional office environment, but the truth was I wasn't used to working in a hostile work environment. So on August 25th, 2023, my husband's managers threw him a going away party and wishing him the best of luck. At the end of the day, he took his computer down to the main office desk and handed it in, followed immediately by me. That was the first time they heard I was leaving at all, and it was immediate, because I had enough of the sexual harassment and hostile work environment, not to mention retaliation. So I left, and my husband and I took a 2-week-long vacation from all of our work and just enjoyed ourselves. We finally got to relax and forget about everything that's happened for the past 7 months. It was truly a breath of fresh air. And you might think the story ends there, but truly there's one more part of this story that's important to tell. Because on September 11th, 2023, my husband started his new job working for this new insurance agency that was much, much larger of a company. And so he was quite happy getting this new job. And I started applying at different companies, trying to get a job of my own again. So I applied for entry-level underwriting, customer service agent, data entry, data analysis. I applied for being, at different temp agencies in the area, trying to get anything I can find. And so I wasn't going after these big positions of being the manager of all sales. I wasn't going to be the CEO of another company. I was going to be an entry-level something in a different company and trying to just get my foot in the door again. But I applied for over 250 of these companies at entry-level positions at this point. And no one, not a single company, ever called me back or offered me an interview at all. But it was so unbelievable that I wasn't getting any responses that I actually ended up sending my resume to HR professionals, to job recruiters, and to a couple friends who kind of run different mega organizations that look at resumes all the time for their employees. And I realized that I needed some tweaks to my resume over time, and so I made a couple tweaks and made things better and better and better. But even they were baffled by the idea that I wasn't hearing back from so many companies for entry-level positions. And that is where we asked some of our friends who work in high-level positions in their organizations. We asked HR professionals who do this for a living, and we asked job recruiters who look at resumes every single day. And we asked them, hey, Is there such a thing as a don't hire list? Basically meaning if a company you worked for did not like the relationship you had with them and didn't like their experience with you as an employee, could they put you on a list of people to other companies to warn them not to hire you because they had a problem with you in whatever way, shape, or form? Does this sort of list exist? Now, here's where I have to clarify that every single HR professional, friend of ours who works in a high-level position in their organizations, and every single job recruiter we asked this question to said almost identical quotes from each other. It was as if they weirdly said the same exact thing as if it was rehearsed between all of them, even though none of them have ever met each other in their entire lives. That was very weird to me, that they kept saying the same thing over and over again, no matter who we talked to. They kept saying that, quote, officially, a do not hire list does not exist. But unofficially, a do not hire list very much does exist. They emphasized officially a couple times there. It's weird to hear that so many times from your friends, job recruiters, and HR professionals. Because if a list like this does exist out there, it would be terrible for employers. Think of all the millions of people who've had bad experiences at their jobs and might be on this list and might have a case for a class action lawsuit against these companies because their old employers were now preventing them from getting another job somewhere else. Think of all the billions of dollars these companies would owe if it ever came out this list existed. But if you say unofficially this list exists, well then, it's not out there for the public use, and the average worker doesn't know it exists to even ask this question. But it's kind of weird. I had a terrible experience. They thought I was lying the entire time, even though they kept finding evidence that I was telling the truth. And suddenly, I can't get hired at over 250 mega companies out there. I can't get hired at any of these Fortune 500 companies I've applied to. I can't get hired for entry-level positions anywhere. Now here's the thing. It might be my resume. It might be the fact that I'm self-employed and trying to get a job in a professional work environment. But really? That's gonna prevent me from getting a job because I had my own company? I mean, in the past, I've worked for a news station and I worked there for 7 years. That's on my resume too, and it shows these employers that I'm willing to work for a company for many years. I get promotions from that company, and that means I'm a good employee for them. And even if you only look at my self-employment of my company, you would see he works with all these clients for many years. He worked with how many organizations that kept hiring him back. So obviously he was professional and did a good job. You know, just because I wasn't being a customer service representative answering phones doesn't mean I wasn't good at customer service, right? And so that made no sense to me at all. Now, in no way am I saying that I'm on this list that officially does not exist anyway, right? What I'm saying is that it's just weird to me how anyone could apply for 250 entry-level positions and not hear a single phone call back from any of them. That's weird, right? Because no matter who you are, even if you're directly out of high school or college, entry-level position means they're at least a little willing to give you a shot. So that's why I decided to make this video at all. For all this time now, since leaving the company in August, I felt like I could not speak up about any of this, especially on our large platform, on Powered by Rainbows, because I was too afraid of the next employer maybe finding this video and saying, wow, I don't want this guy to work for me. But seeing that I'm being denied those positions anyway, it's kind of obvious at this point that I'm not going to get a job in a professional office right away again. It's kind of obvious that I'm not going to get those entry-level positions at these companies, so I might as well share with you the truth of what happened. Because I know for some of you out there, you might be victims of it too. You might be victims of sexual harassment, retaliation, and even more in the workplace. And you might be thinking that you're alone right now and you're the only one going through it, but I assure you, you are not the only one. And I know for a lot of gay men out there especially, you might be afraid of speaking up about what happened to you because most of the cases that we hear about of sexual harassment in the workplace are coming from women who were sexually harassed by their male supervisors and so on. You might think it only happens to them, but the truth is it happens to men, women, non-binary people, trans people, and every gendered person out there this happens to. It happens to straight people, gay people, bisexual, and every sexual orientation out there. It happens to all of us. And it doesn't really matter what your sexual orientation or gender identity is, it can happen to you too. I mean, look at it from this perspective. This was a company that truly did not care at all that any of this happened to me, and then blamed me for not wearing headphones and ignoring it all. They blamed the victim of this. And they had the audacity, even after their IT department and everyone else involved admitted to everything, they still accused me of lying about it all. Nowadays, I'm almost exclusively applying for work from home positions only because the thought of going into another office is terrifying to me. My anxiety and my OCD have gotten to insane, crazy levels where I'm afraid to even leave my house some days. Going on vacation with my family or going out at all is truly a nightmare for me because these experiences do have a lasting effect on you. The anxiety I feel walking into a public restroom anytime now is sometimes crippling. But I guess, as my family sometimes says, I just have to suck it up. I mean, they've worked in construction for how many years, and they don't know what sexual harassment really is. Because on a construction site, some guys say weird things to each other. But in a professional office, you shouldn't have to fear going to the restroom. Especially when everyone there knows your husband is 2 floors up. It makes no sense to me. And it makes no sense that a company would not protect their employees from even the basic need of using the restroom, where no one would get in trouble. And to my knowledge, every single person I have mentioned in this story, from the person who tried to intimidate me and said, I would like to swallow your medicine, the person that joked around about having sexual intercourse with a 12-year-old girl, the other employee who was friends with him and watched turtle eating videos on the internet, the 2 people who looked up pictures of supermodels and compared the breast sizes of each one of them, the manager who encouraged them to look up another supermodel, the managers who refused to take any of our concerns to HR and reported nothing to them because they were afraid of getting in trouble as well. The employee who followed me into the restroom and asked me to perform something sexual with him. And then when he didn't get that, reported me for some bogus claim and slandered my reputation. The employees who talked about their vaginas bleeding, how much ejaculate each of their boyfriends had inside of them at that very moment, and how none of their boyfriends knew about each other, and how their cat's anus had fissures on it because they were sick. None of them, to my current knowledge, have left the company. It is baffling how they have jobs comfortably and can do whatever they want without repercussions. Meanwhile, here I am, struggling to find an entry-level new job, applying at over 250 places so far, resorting to temp agencies and grocery stores to hopefully get a job there, just so I can earn some money for my family, and having crippling anxiety anytime I leave the house. because of the situations that happened in that company 1 year ago. Tell me how any of that is fair. Please tell me. Because truly, I do not know. Now, I want to make it very clear that I do not in any way encourage anyone to go find this company online, harass them in any way, or do anything against them. I do not want you to do that. All I wanted to do was present the truth of what happened. That way, you can hopefully understand why there hasn't been many videos on this channel recently. Because I've been so busy working trying to get another job to provide for my family that I haven't had time to make these videos. And I'm so sorry about that. I hope you can understand that I've been going through absolute hell for the past year because of this situation, and I really haven't had the time or the mental capacity to make happy, cheery videos about LGBTQ education. It just hasn't been my top priority, and I'm so sorry for that. There are things we need to celebrate, like 100,000 followers recently. I mean, that's amazing, but I haven't been able to mentally focus on it because I'm still trying to get a job and make ends meet. And the truth is, I only have this YouTube channel and ProfessorPride.com where we sell LGBTQ pride items. And that's it. That's my contribution to our family. That's my contribution to paying the rent, the utilities, the food. That's my contribution to all of it. And so without you guys supporting us, I wouldn't have been able to do any of that and contribute anything to our family. So I'm super, super appreciative of everything you've been doing and watching episodes and getting items on ProfessorPride.com, because that is it for me right now. I'm super appreciative of my husband for working tirelessly every day to help us provide for our family and pay the bills while I've been going through this entire process of trying to find a new job. But it really shouldn't just be on him to support us. It should be both of us working in a team. In fact, a little while ago, we went to buy a home because we're tired of renting an apartment and we want to have our own property. We're married and we want to buy a house, get a dog, and adopt a kid someday soon. But none of that is possible because the banks look at me and say, I don't have a job. They don't care that I make videos for the internet. They need me to have another job, working for another company. And because of whatever situation is happening, I'm not able to have that. I'm not able to get that. But this is still one thing I can do. I can make a video and hopefully explain things where you can understand that if you're a victim of this too, that you're not alone. Because it happens to everyone, no matter their sexual orientation, gender identity. It doesn't matter. Sexual harassment does not discriminate on who you are or who you love. It can happen to anyone. And here I am, finally able to speak up and finally tell you that it's happened to me too.